gentlemen, welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and our guest this evening is the City Councilor from Ward 2, Estelle Rand. Welcome, Estelle.
Thank you, George. Nice to see you.
So, the issue I think I've been working on with other city councilors is three simple questions, What do you think is the state of the city? Where do you think it's going? And where would you like it to go? So, from the beginning, what do you think the state of the city is right now?
Well, right now, the state of the city, I guess, it would be hard to talk about any person or anyone in the city without mentioning the pandemic that we're all moving through, hopefully. So I think a huge factor in the state of our city right now, both economically and socially, is connected to the pandemic. Right now at City Hall, they're very focused on creating access for the vaccine. So just recently, our senior center partnered to provide some, like a pop-up event for vaccination for the elders in our community. Right now, we're in the second phase of our vaccine plan. And so, if you're 75 or older, you can get the vaccine, which will be moving on to, within this phase, we'll also be moving on to 65-year-olds and older, teachers, food service workers, agricultural workers will also be in this phase. So I think that's really, it's challenging that we've been kind of in a crisis mode for almost a year now, but that still is at the top of the concerns for myself and I know that the mayor and his team is working really hard to partner regionally to meet the needs and be successful in rolling out the vaccine.
Yeah.
So
So
I
yeah,
think
the vaccines are going
kind of
around.
top of the list.
And
They are, yeah.
I've got my 2 shots. My wife got her first shot at Victoria Rocky, and she's scheduled for another one. So it's working slowly, but it's working. And
that's really good news.
If
did you have a good experience with it?
Yeah, the first shot I had a slight pain in the arm. Second shot I didn't even know anything happened. So it was smooth. And
good.
I think aside from the trauma that we're all going through with the pandemic and the lockdowns, and now you're locked down, no you're not, there's 1 mask, 2 masks, and all that confusion. What do you think the state of the city is by itself without those traumas?
Well, we're in a really good financial position despite the, kind of the uncertainty of coming through the pandemic. So, and I attribute that to really sound financial policies that the city has. We have an interesting council meeting coming up on March 1st, where you're going to hear a lot of action. There are quite a few public hearings dealing with transferring free cash to various capital projects, basically. So that's an interesting meeting that allows for public participation. And I think what we're seeing the result of is good planning during a budget cycle and kind of having enough remaining to consider large projects and to consider supporting current capital improvement projects like the police department. So we have, I feel comfortable saying that the city is technically in a good financial position. I do think that on individual and personal levels that there's a major concern for things like affordability of Beverly, especially, and that comes down to meeting your basic needs. So affordability of housing is a huge concern that I am personally concerned with as the Ward 2 counselor. So I represent the downtown area, which has an amazing socioeconomic range in Ward 2. And I wouldn't want to see that range go away. So I think despite the city's great financial position, as the citizens and people of the city, we are concerned and still placing affordability at the top of our minds. So that's kind of a reality of where we are today.
Does your ward include much of Rantoul Street construction?
It does.
Is it all Ward 2, or is it split between 1 and 2?
So Ward 2 goes up to, do you know where Gloria Foods is?
Yeah.
On Rantoul Street? Yeah, so Ward 2 ends at that intersection, basically, in terms of Rantoul Street. So we've had, let's see, 4 new buildings in Ward 2 on Rantoul Street over the past, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's a whole, I'm sure you're familiar with the most recently approved Beverly Crossing project called the Depot 2, which will be on the block where the old Casa de Luca restaurant was located, and the old press box. So that whole block will be developed within the next year or so. They'll be starting construction this spring and going from there. So yes, Ward 2 Rantoul Street has had a lot of activity, a lot of change. I love some of the little tidbits about those buildings are that there are a lot of dog owners. So we see a lot of new furry friends on Rantoul Street. And a lot of the people who live in the new buildings are North Shore residents. So I think it's really interesting and important to make sure we're welcoming people who are living in new developments into our city and engaging them as we would neighbors on our street, to continue that kind of warmth and community that Beverly is known for.
So you mentioned earlier that you were interested in affordability of housing. Do these buildings meet your criteria, or should we be looking at something different?
That's a really good question. So one of the things that I worked on, I think it was about 4 years ago now, is the city's policy for requiring affordable housing when there's a new development. So I worked very closely with the planning department and the mayor's office at that time, and local affordable housing experts to come up with something that created a little bit more of a deeper affordability, a requirement for deeper affordability. So any new housing you see going up is required to build 12% of their units at affordable cost. So that affordable is defined by the area median income. So one of the things that we deal with here on the North Shore is the area median income is quite high, actually.
Yeah, it's around 75,000 for a family in Beverly. Yeah, and it's what?
So
60% of the median is the magic number, I think.
Yeah, so there are different tiers. You can offer more units at 80% or fewer units at 60%. Mm-hmm. So I'm really proud that I was part of that process to really push for for deeper affordability. I don't think that's the only tool we need to use to maintain some affordability in our city. I think we have to, we have to use every tool and maybe invent some new ones.
Mhm.
One of the things that our planning department has done that we can kind of look to is they conducted a study and came out with a housing plan, basically, with a list of recommendations for our city that can be followed to create a pathway to creating housing. It's not all focused on creating affordable housing, but it helps kind of lay out, when you're looking at land use and zoning, it lays out the need and some of the options we have in our city for creating housing. One of my favorite choices that I would like to see coming sooner than later is an accessory dwelling unit option here in Beverly. I would like to see some zoning that allows for an accessory dwelling unit. And what that does is help to create affordable options, both for example, let's say I'm still living in my home, I'm 85 years old, and I want to stay in my home, but it's becoming less affordable. An accessory dwelling unit, it could be a solution to helping me stay in my home and generating enough of kind of an income cushion so that I can stay in my home and welcome a young couple into Beverly at the same time who maybe are having a hard time finding an affordable place to live. So I think there's a lot to be looked into when it comes to housing and zoning, and accessory dwelling units I think are a great option. Some of the pushback you might hear on that is that it changes single family neighborhoods into multifamily neighborhoods. And so I anticipate robust discussions about that issue. Here in Ward 2, we've had a lot of change. We have, I can, from my home in Goat Hill, I can see the point, I can see, the new units that were built just on the waterfront now. And that's a big change. But there are positive things that have come with that too. The walkway along the waterfront, the new units that are right down by, they're called Sedna. They're right down by the Beverly Salem Bridge. They're in order to develop there, you're required to create public access to the waterfront. So if you haven't had a chance, I would go down there. It's not completely finished. You can only go so far and then you have to turn around, but you can see, you can look across to Salem. You can look at the Beverly Salem Bridge. It's a beautiful spot to be able for the public to access now. And that public access was triggered by development. So there are definitely pros and cons to that, despite that development not being what I would consider a solution to affordable housing. Yeah. We all get some benefit from it.
Yeah, right now it's getting a little complicated because they're tearing down they've already torn down the old McDonald's, and they're starting working on the new restaurant. And that construction site gets a little complicated, and trying to get the gate open and not gate open, it gets to be a long discussion. But we're starting to mention some of the pushback on accessory housing. And when Councilor Feldman joined us to talk about what's going on in her ward, she was mentioning that a lot of the houses that were simple bungalows built right after World War II, part of the process when the troops came home, are now adding on to have an in-law apartment part of the building, or again, expand it so that you have multi-generations in the same house. And this is one of the areas that they can't stop, because I looked into it, and as long as you got one entrance to the house, no matter how many different generations are there, it's still a single family dwelling. So you haven't changed the character. But when we had a discussion with your compatriot from Ward 1, Todd Rotondo, he was mentioning that he started out, I don't know if he still is, in a duplex with him and his brother. And this is one of the issues that comes up of how do you increase wealth in a double-decker or a triple-decker, where you've got somebody helping you pay off the mortgage, is a way to develop a family kitty that you can lean back on when you need it. So this is one of the issues, I think, as you mentioned, it's not covered too clearly in the Plan Beverly. And I think it's one of these things there's room for improvement in that area. And the other one is when we had DeFrenza on the show, Andrew DeFrenza, he and I got into a discussion about affordable housing and housing you can afford, which is not covered by the other issue. And he's very much interested in getting his hands on that little kitty that they can put money into in lieu of affordable housing. So these things are kind of things that you're working on in Ward 2, or is that someplace else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made some good points there. What I do encourage you to look at the housing study and the recommendations that came out of the housing study. They're not, like you said, the master plan doesn't lay out a pathway to affordable housing, but I would say that the recommendations that came out of the housing study do address that.
Well, is this housing study available online or something?
It is, yeah. Well, you can find it on the planning department's website.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look.
Through the City of Beverly, yeah. Yeah, and I can send it to you after too. But yes, absolutely. Like I said, the work that I did to kind of address the affordability of our requirements of new development was definitely in line with what you're talking about. I'm currently, thinking a lot about this type of kind of smaller, denser, more affordable housing, because one of the things that did come out of the master plan is that it's clear that the Bass River corridor is, we could see kind of a public zoning and planning process for the Bass River corridor as soon as this spring. So that's a lot of space to rezone for housing potentially. So it's really important to me that the type of housing that's allowed there, it creates affordable units.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I think what you're talking about is where the Bolomat used to be, and I've heard rumors that the lumberyard is going to get sold and become. Is this what you mean by the corridor? These buildings are now.
Yeah, and some of it's in Ward 2, and some of it is Ward 1.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, but yeah, that's there's a lot of space there, and those are big lots that have not ever been zoned for housing before. Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity. Makes me a little bit nervous because I've seen the transit-oriented development around the MBTA. I think it's very appropriate, but I don't know that. I would not necessarily support that height on the Bass River corridor. I think it's appropriate where it has gone in on Rantoul Street. I'd like to see, I mean, there must be some magic formula to development and lot size and density that creates affordable. We just have to find it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my research problem right now.
Yeah, the problem comes down to one of the builder wants to maximize his return on investment, and so does the manager of the facilities. And that
Right.
means more apartments and high-priced apartments or condos. And that's what attracts the expatriates from Boston who can't afford to live there. They can move to Beverly because we're not quite as expensive yet. And it's supply and demand. And what's makes the city very attractive is a lot of the amenities and the convenience. This goes back to Scanlon the first time I heard it. The mayor of Beverly is unique in that we've got 5 railroad stations. And at the same time, I can't see the character of the city remaining what it is right now if we have a 1 mile circle around every railroad station filled with high-rise apartments and condos. And this gets to be the question of what is the character of Beverly that we're trying to preserve? So where do you think the city really ought to go?
Well, I can't blame people for wanting to come here, that's for sure. I am not a Beverly native.
No, neither am I. So neither one of us can point fingers.
And look how much we care.
Yeah, I got in. It's too late for you.
So I certainly don't blame people for wanting to come here, and I don't also blame developers for thinking about their bottom line. They're always going to do that. Yeah. So it's really the city. It's really our responsibility to develop zoning tools that guide the developers to what we want to see in our city. Yeah. So, and I do feel confident that the planning department is really poised to think about zoning as a tool like that, and to work with constituents and citizens to come up with some better zoning requirements and design guidelines for new development. I mean, the character of our city, I think, which just makes me think about the things that I love about Beverly, what attracted me to coming here myself, is the affordability, proximity to the train, the fact that we have free public beaches. I think is just, it's such a gift to the community and our region that we have gorgeous free public beaches and parks. I think preserving our open space and maintaining our assets, our infrastructure, and I think those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on to really preserve a character in Beverly. It's really about maintenance of our assets, both the natural ones and the infrastructure assets that we have.
Yeah, I think one of the shortcomings so far of the system is that for both Ward 1 and Ward 2, there's no really convenient market where you can buy large quantities of food within walking distance. So I think one of the fallacies of the make Beverly walkable is that there's no place to walk to. And if you want to get some food and bring it home, yeah, you get a lot of restaurants around there. But for a family, again, you're talking about affordability. You can't afford to go out and eat out for every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that's one of the shortcomings that my commercial, if you will, of what should be happening in the city. So we got a few minutes left. In the grand scheme of things, in 3 minutes or less, where do you think the city ought to go?
I think let's see, where ought we go? I think continuing on a path of being inclusive, so keeping things like affordability always at the front of our minds is very important. I think that continuing to explore revenue streams that don't involve development is really important. I think that keeping, I guess, as an elected official, maintaining that responsibility of pushing ideas that aren't always comfortable at first, like walkability. I think our city is very walkable, but I also live in Ward 2. But how do we maintain that walkability and make it contagious? You know, how do we connect other wards to themselves and to downtown and keep people moving and safe and feeling comfortable in our city, in the public, you know, young people, older people, baby carriages, you know, I think, you know, we just need to continue to be as inclusive as possible, have that lens whenever we're looking at a project or a change.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Estelle, for joining us. And obviously, there's more to talk about, and I would like to invite you back sometime in the near future, especially after this March 1st meeting, to see what really came from it. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for watching. And this is part of a series where I've been pushing to have the councilors come in and one by one give us their story on where you think the city is, where's it going, and where do you think it ought to go. And I'm down to just one councilor left. I'll leave his name out, but I'll bug him anyway. And thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy.